This brings us to step 8, keep the project moving. So far, in the first 7 steps, we've carefully created high-resolution project plans. We now use those plans as our measures, as our yardstick, to keep the project moving and keep it on track. Specifically, we look at that project charter and we ask ourselves, are we performing what we contracted to do? We look at our descriptions of project roles and responsibilities and authority, and are people performing those roles and responsibilities adequately? We look at our deliverables specs and our project scope statement, our task list, effort duration, and all of that. We continually, on a weekly basis or every couple of days, return to all of these tables and schedules, and we compare. Where are we related to this particular artifact? Are we on target? Do we need to make some sort of adjustment? That's what we need to find out. So you compare planned to actual. So our target here, the artifacts and tools that we are shooting for to complete step 8, keep the project moving, which is really an ongoing step. Periodic progress checks of each dimension of the project. Is it moving along as promised? Inspections, and you, project manager, becoming aware of the overall progress towards completion. And necessary interventions. What needs to be changed to correct problems, remove obstacles, and keep the project moving as planned. And finally, formal status reports. We create and we circulate reports on a weekly basis or maybe a bi-weekly basis of what's been completed, what's upcoming to focus people's attention, where the project problems are and obstacles, and finally how we're going to get those obstacles removed. Communicate those in status reports. Now also, while the project's rolling along, you may need to handle scope changes, which is step 9. Scope changes are normal because, after all, our project plans were preliminary estimates. We may need to make changes as we learn more. Some of the results of this step include adjustments to the project plan. You need to modify your project plan to deal with additions, reductions, or changes to your deliverables, or modifications to the work process because your team's been up and working and has learned some things now. Now also, because your project charter or your proposal was basically a contract between the sponsor and you want to formally document each of your scope changes in writing and get approval of them so that your current project plans and that which is contracted is updated to reflect what you've learned and what you've both agreed to was necessary. Typical artifacts and tools that are involved in this step 9 handle scope changes include an agreement among key project players about the nature of the scope change, a documented agreement, and finally an approved scope change order or a contract change order. In the Project Management Minimalist, we have a sample or a template for a project change order, as well as lots of these other things like the status report and everything else we've been talking about here. This brings us at last to step 10. Close out your phases and close out the project. As we've noted earlier, projects are finite. The money that can be spent is finite, and so the time that can be spent is finite, as well as the amount of effort and labor that you can ask people to spend on a project. All of that's agreed to in a finite way. So we need to close out formally each of our phases and close out formally the entire project through the use of sign-offs and other tools. Typical activities associated with closing out phases and closing out the entire project include verifying that all of your deliverables that you promised to build, the ones that you chartered or proposed, were satisfactorily completed. And satisfactorily means that you've got a formal approval, a formal written approval. You also need to complete the administrative tasks like closing out job assignments, schedules, wrapping up budgets, ending vendor contracts, writing a letter of recommendation for your project workers. You need to plan and execute the handoff of deliverables, that which you built. How will it be used? How is it going to be handed off to the people who are going to be using it? You need to plan that and take that into account for the closeout. You need to archive the project plan, maybe put it in a nice binder where somebody can come and use it as a reference work later on. And finally, conduct a post-mortem where you step back, you ask yourself some key questions. what could we have done better, what went wrong, and what are some lessons learned that we need to apply as a project team and maybe even as a larger organization so that we can manage our projects in the future more effectively. Now here's a note about meaningful sign-offs. A meaningful sign-off would clearly specify the name of each of the deliverables that's being approved. It would also list exceptions or items that are not approved and revisions that are necessary on those unapproved items along with deadlines. It also would have an acknowledgement that any changes that aren't in this sign-off, if they decide to make changes later on, there could be an impact upon the overall schedule, the cost, and the resource requirements. And finally, it includes a written signature of the person who's authorized to approve your project deliverables. Summarizing then, our targets for Step 10, closeout phases and close out the project, include an archive binder with annotated, revised project plans in it, our sign-offs, any change orders, any key documentation, summary reports, handoff strategies so we plan to hand off the deliverables and make sure they're well used, and finally a post-mortem and a summary of lessons learned. So that's it. Those are the 10 steps to project success. You can become a project management minimalist by simply applying these 10 steps on your first project and then stepping back and dropping steps that didn't make sense, or adding steps where you think you need a little bit more control. The bottom line here is that these 10 steps don't require you to go to graduate school. They don't require you to get some kind of fancy certification. These are clear, simple steps. They're not rocket science. And with the help of the project management minimalist and the tools inside and a little bit of common sense, anyone can manage their projects more effectively using these 10 steps to project success. Remember, to get your summary of the 10 steps to project success, along with the results of successful performance of each step, go to michaelgreer.biz/10steps.pdf. That document also includes hot links to the Project Management Minimalist free table of contents download.